Hello, everybody. This is Secular Sekai with Tridents Against Tyrants, and we're going to be doing extra streams instead of just one stream a week this upcoming week because I swear I keep having a lot of things keep me busy, and then my setup, I have to press two buttons to go live the way I have it set up right now, which is kind of annoying. And in any case, we're going to go ahead and jump right into the news because we are live. But yeah, the same thing happened last week. I pressed go live, but there are two go live buttons I have to press with my current setup, and it's very annoying when you're in a hurry and you have everything lined up, you are good to go, and then you realize that you only hit one instead of two of the buttons. But in any case, welcome. Thank you for joining me today. This is Secular Sekai with Tridents Against Tyrants. You'll notice on screen that I have a few extra pop-ups right now. Up at the top of the screen, there will be one for PayPal donations to soldiers, and another one for membership if you wish to become a member on the channel. Those will pop up occasionally. But yeah, with that, let's go ahead and jump right into everything. Yeah, there it is. So there's an example if you want to become a member on Buy Me a Coffee. There's an example of PayPal donations that go to soldiers. And in the lower left, you'll always see the link for making donations to soldiers with Buy Me a Coffee if, the yellow Buy Me a Coffee if PayPal or Monobank, neither one of those work for you. All right, welcome everybody. And I see we got a couple of people here today. We've got Anna, Mariam, William Turkshek, Leathercat, the real Dave Seaman, Tim's, Dumitru, CF Beauty. Thank you, CF Beauty. Thank you for always messaging me when I'm in a hurry and I need someone to get a hold of me. Because it happens a lot here recently. Yvonne Way, KK's GG. Welcome, everybody. And with that, we're going to go ahead and jump right into the news because it's already almost an hour past when we usually start. And I had a late start to the day, so let's go. All right, well, so a lot of stuff has happened. First thing we're going to cover is a bit of news regarding Russia, and something that I'm sure most of you have probably heard about. All right. Now then, you'll notice that I have already shared this in both the description and the chat. The link, if anyone wants to click on it to follow along and read the article. Moscow concert hall attack. Putin tells Russians Ukraine linked to attack which killed 133, claims denied by Kiev officials. Live updates. Death toll in Crocus City Hall terror attack rises to 133. TASS reports the Russian Investigative Committee has announced that the death toll from Friday's shooting and arson terror attack at the Crocus City Hall has risen to 133. 41 people have been identified and named as killed by the Ministry of Health. 107 people are in hospital. The Guardian has compiled a new short video summarizing the news of the terrorist attack on the outskirts of Moscow on Friday night. It's carefully edited, of course, but just to warn readers, still contains the sound of shots from high-powered guns the attackers are believed to have carried, and shows the terrible blaze and aftermath inside the concert hall, which was brought under control by around midnight local time. Yeah, we're not going to play the video right here, but if you want to, go find the link in the chat, and you can go find that video. The Islamic State jihadist group said on Saturday that 4 of its militants carried out an attack on a concert hall in a Moscow suburb that Russian authorities said killed at least 133 people. I'm going to turn my membership stuff off for now, but I will keep the drones and other soldier donation information up, or it'll keep popping up on screen occasionally. Everybody. All right. All right, yeah. A Moscow suburb that Russian authorities said killed at least 133 people and used fire bombs amongst its weapons. The Agence France-Presse reports Islamic State said on one of its Telegram channels, quote, the attack was carried out by 4 IS fighters armed with machine guns, a pistol, knives, and fire bombs. Oh, and also, again, I've got 2 buttons, and I started talking before I pressed the second one, so you guys wouldn't have heard this. I do still have a bit of a cough. I had the flu pretty bad. Last week, a week and a half ago. And I'm pretty much healthy from that now, but I have a post-viral cough, and I've been told that it may not go away completely for a couple of weeks. So, yeah, if I'm coughing a lot, I apologize. Please bear with me. Hopefully, it won't be a month before my cough is completely gone. All right. Now then, the militant group said its fighters killed, quote, dozens of Christians as part of its, quote, raging war with countries it said were fighting Islam. The jihadists had already said on Friday night they carried out the attack and claimed their fighters had returned to base safely. This contradicts the assertions of Vladimir Putin. The Kremlin, which has not reacted to the militant group's claim, said 11 people had been arrested, including 4 terrorists involved in the attack. Russia is fighting Islamic State in Syria, and the jihadist group has also had a presence in the Muslim-majority Russian republics of Ingushetia, Dagestan, and Chechnya. The group has carried out attacks in Russia, but has never before said it was behind such a major atrocity. Russian National Guard, Rosgardvia officers walk past the Kremlin Wall in Moscow on March 23, 2024, a day after the attack. You know, and here's the thing, with a situation like this, these regions of Russia that were mentioned have since the 90s had a predisposition for religiously inspired extremist activity. But at the same time, when your government that you're forced to live under is that of the Russian Federation, so-called Federation, which is in and of itself a terrorist entity, it just kind of ends up being you know, one way or another. It's just kind of rotten in either direction. You can end up with religious, and that's assuming this was from ISIS, because they make the claim, but there's also a lot of people, of course, who are asking, was it ISIS? Was it a false flag operation from the Russian government? Was it, Ukrainian special forces or intelligence agencies? Was it the U.S.? Et cetera, et cetera. Everyone's got their own theories and conspiracy theories also about it. At the end of the day, don't have any definitive information on any of it, and I don't really trust anything that the Russians themselves say. So, it could be a lot of things, but the only thing that is certain is there was an attack, and civilians died, and this doesn't look good for Putin. In terms of image, it doesn't project being in control of a lot of the situations happening right now involving the enemy country. Well, and by that I'm talking about Russia. Russia does not appear to be in control in a lot of ways, and that domestically could be a big problem for Putin. And yeah, problems for Putin, that's good for Ukraine. So let's just hope that he continues to have more issues that harm his credibility domestically. All right. The four suspected gunmen detained after a deadly attack on a concert hall near Moscow are all foreign citizens, Russia's interior ministry said on Saturday, Reuters reports. Russia said it had arrested all four gunmen suspected of carrying out the shooting massacre, and the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, pledged to track down and punish those behind the attack. There is still little detail on this, so do stay tuned. The Russian Interior Ministry is issuing a statement saying that the attackers in the Moscow concert hall tragedy are, quote, not Russian citizens. This latest line is just emerging, and we'll have more for you in a moment. And the Reuters news agency is releasing details. U.S. told Russia Islamic State was planning to attack Moscow, according to a report. U.S. intelligence gathered intelligence just this month that ISPK, a branch of the Islamic State group based in Afghanistan, so it'd be, is it Kurdistan? Yeah. Was eyeing Russia for a terrorist attack, the New York Times has reported, citing unnamed U.S. officials. The outlet goes on to explain that Islamic State has been relatively quiet until recently, but has been stepping up efforts to launch attacks on anti-Islamist targets in Europe and beyond. Some plots had been thwarted, leaving experts believe that IS had diminished scope until now. Referring to the ISPK and ISIS-K, the New York Times quotes an analyst who said that Islamic State has been critical of Vladimir Putin and Russian propaganda. Colin Clark, counterterrorism analyst at the Sofan Group, a security consulting firm based in New York, told the New York Times, ISIS-K has been fixated on Russia for the past 2 years and accuses the Kremlin of having Muslim blood on its hands, referencing Moscow's interventions in Afghanistan, Chechnya, and Syria. The U.S. team has now taken this blog from our colleagues in London and will keep you up to date with the news from Russia as it develops and reaches us. So, and then we've got summaries. Oh, wow. It says summary, but that's actually, well, I guess it's multiple bullet points that are each of their own little mini summary, but it's a lot for a summary. Hold on, let me just see how much longer this goes on. If it's part of the same article or if these are multiple articles flowing together. So there's a lot of there's a lot of claims coming from the Kremlin side here. Which, of course, I would take anything that's said by Putin or the Kremlin with not just a grain of salt. I would basically laugh, smother it in ketchup and mustard, and then it still would not be edible, so I would throw it into a cage with a very, very hungry hyena, and I doubt even the hyena would eat whatever shit the Kremlin spews, even after that. But according to Putin, all four attackers were detained while heading to Ukraine after attack. Yeah, no. It seems like a very convenient narrative. And this is exactly why you hear people coming up with, well, it's the Russians behind it, or, oh, it was planned and coordinated by Ukraine, but in the aftermath, the Russians are, trying to spin a tale that helps them with their domestic public image in the war against Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. At the end of the day, guys, I've been getting messages about this from people, and we just don't really know yet, to the best of my knowledge, at least. So yeah, if I had to put my money on this, I would say either a false flag attack by Russia or a legitimate attack by ISIS. One of those two. Because they make Occam's razor, go with what's the simplest explanation. And given Russia's track record and given ISIS's track record, both of them, either one of those scenarios seem the most plausible. eventually you just have to cut through the bullshit, and even if you don't have 100% information on exactly what occurred, either of those scenarios seem the most likely to me. All right, now then. This goes on for quite a while. But anyone who would like to read the remainder of this article, please feel free to do so. Again, the link is in the description of the video. Let's skip right quick down to... Here we go. This is what I want to focus on. Podolak. Any attempts to connect Ukraine to the terrorist attack are absolutely untenable. In a long post on social media, Ukrainian presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolak has repeated his denial that Kyiv had anything to do with the terror attack at Crocus City Hall, saying that any attempts to connect Ukraine to the terrorist attack are absolutely untenable. He said, quote, Ukraine has not the slightest connection to this incident. Ukraine has a full-scale war with Russia and will solve the problem of Russia's aggression, by the way, with a deliberate terrorist component, on the battlefield. The versions of Russian special services regarding Ukraine are absolutely untenable and absurd. We expected Russian officials' version of the Ukrainian trace in the terrorist attack in Crocus City Hall. Primitivism and predictability are ideal characteristics of the Russian security services. Once again, the FSB confirms this, but it is still necessary to emphasize... I don't know why they cut off the very last sentence like that, but they want to emphasize something. That's funny. Not the subject matter, but just the fact that it trails off like that. All right. Now, on a side note relating to a regional rival and a country who I've talked about a bit on the channel, Erdogan of Turkey condemns attack and says terror is the common enemy of humanity. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan on Saturday condemned the heinous terrorist attack in a Moscow concert hall that has left at least 115 people dead. We strongly condemn this heinous terrorist attack targeting innocent civilians, Erdogan told a public rally in the capital, Ankara. Terrorism is unacceptable no matter who it comes from or who the perpetrator is. I wish he would say that to Vladimir Putin's face. And then send a bunch of guns and fighter jets and anti-aircraft guns directly to Ukraine. That would make a big difference. That's a statement that I would like to see, which I know I won't from Erdogan. AFP reports Erdogan said Turkey shared Russia's pain, adding, quote, "We'll continue to fight against terror, the common enemy of the humanity." Turkey's president has exerted considerable diplomatic effort to attempt to mediate between Russia and Ukraine since Russia's full-scale invasion in February of 2022. Turkey was instrumental in helping broker a grain corridor deal way back in 2022. Turkey has repeatedly launched attacks at Kurdish separatists, which it considers to be terrorist groups inside Syria and Iraq. So remember, when Erdogan especially puts a statement out, they have their own, they like every other country, of course, but they have their own interests in the region. So it makes sense that there'd at least be a statement of some sort coming out from that country on this. And Ukrainian Military Intelligence official claim Ukraine linked to attack, quote, another lie from Russia. Ukraine was not involved in Friday's shooting attack near Moscow, and suggestions of a Ukrainian link have nothing in common with reality, a spokesperson for Kyiv's military spy agency said on Saturday. Reuters reports Andriy Yusov of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry's main directorate of intelligence told it, quote, quote, "This is, of course, another lie from the Russian special services, which has nothing in common with reality and does not stand up against any criticism." So, oh, and this was the end of the article, so we'll finish it out. Um, he went on to say Ukraine was, of course, not involved in this terror attack. Ukraine is defending its sovereignty from Russian invaders, liberating its own territory, and is fighting with the occupier's army and military targets, not civilians. That's a fact. Yes, exactly. And so, yeah, it at the end of the day, any attempt by Russia to put this onto Ukraine is pretty pitiful. The only targets that Ukraine has been going after are economic and military targets, such as all of the different oil depositories and extraction facilities across Russia. And more of those will be targeted until this stops. And the Russian economy can completely suffer. Like at the end of the day, until Russia gets out of Ukraine, of course, we all know it's pretty hard to have sympathy for Russia. And especially when they try to use opportunism, be opportunistic and point the finger like a child at Ukraine anytime something happens. It's asinine. All right. Sergei Sobyanin, the mayor of Moscow, has visited a hospital where people injured in the Crocus City Hall attack are being treated. RIA quotes him saying at the Botkin Hospital that, quote, today there are 80 people injured during the terrorist attack in Moscow clinics. The best Moscow doctors are fighting for their lives and health. Earlier reports had said more than 120 people were hospitalized. RIA reports, citing the Moscow Regional Health Authority, that 2 people who were hurt in the Crocus City Hall terror attack have been discharged from hospital. So, that's a fairly good recap. And of course, there was a lot more in this article I did not read, but feel free to go take a look at the entire thing yourself. It's about a 39-minute read, so it's a lot of content. But yeah, pretty comprehensive. Covers quite a bit of ground on this. All right, let's take a look at our chat right quick. Oh, wow, we got 52 people here. Well, welcome, everybody. Glad that, glad to have everybody here. Oh, and before I forget, we are going to open Q&A, so I'm opening that up right now. One sec. I'm also super glad that I was able to get my audio equipment working for this stream today, because for this last week, I don't know why. Well, actually, I do know why now. I had an issue with one of my cables, and I tried it just stopped working all of a sudden one day, guys. Like I tried restarting my computer, I tried restarting my my audio control console, everything. And then I replaced this one cable, and now it's all working again. But yeah, that was something that happened this week. Anyway, Q&A is open. Let's go on to the next article. Let's see. This one is related to Ukraine and funding to fight off the invaders. This article is by CNN. Let me put it into the chat. One sec. All right. And with that, let's keep going. Europe is trying to fill up. There we go. Europe is trying to fill a U.S. shaped hole in funding for Ukraine. Ukraine sees heaviest bombardment on its infrastructure since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war. Can Europe fill the gap left by the United States in Ukraine? That has been on the minds of European officials for a long time as they gaze across the Atlantic and see funds being blocked and the potential return of Donald Trump. I'll say this, we can't be complacent, everybody. If you're an American and you're listening, go out and vote. Just remember, vote against Donald Trump. And with the way that the U.S. system is set up, I know people don't like it, who are independents, who are third party, who aren't red team versus blue team. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump and the way he has transformed the Republican Party of the United States into his own little personal cult is the biggest threat to Ukraine when it comes to American politics. If you support Ukraine, go vote for the opposite candidate, opposite major party candidate and party of Donald Trump. And yeah, so that's me saying it without saying it. But you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. If that man were to return and somehow steal an election, Donald Trump, then that is no good for Ukraine. Right now, we're at a situation where people are pushing to get aid to Ukraine as soon as possible, but it's still looking like we're a good 7 to 8 months away minimum before more major U.S. funding makes it to Ukraine. And in the interim, let's see what Europe is doing to plug the gap. It's a question the European Union is attempting to answer. At a European Council summit this week, the bloc agreed to explore new ways to raise funds for Ukraine, including by raising debt on financial markets and, controversially, using profits from frozen Russian assets. Belgian Prime Minister Alexander De Croo said that there was openness, at least on our side, to new ways of funding and pointedly added that Europe cannot, quote, wait for the U.S. to make up our minds. However, leaders stopped short of agreeing any new money, agreeing on any new money for weapons. That could be a problem. The urgency of Ukraine's need for weapons is increasingly acute. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly told his Western allies that the biggest challenge the country faces right now is a weapons deficit that has allowed Russia to take advantage. It would be unfair to accuse the EU of not pulling its weight on Ukraine, despite public disagreements between the 27 member states on things like sending tanks and whether money should come directly from the EU budget. The bloc as a whole has sent more money to Kyiv than the U.S., according to the Kiel Institute's Ukraine Support Tracker. However, the same tracker also shows that only $5.6 billion of the EU's total $85 billion has been specifically allocated for military aid. That's important to note, everybody. Don't get me wrong. Everything else, humanitarian aid, economic aid, infrastructure aid, energy infrastructure especially, all that's important. But you can rebuild and you can put money aside for that all day long. But it doesn't help when the enemy right across, the guy, when the enemy who's invading has ramped up their military production and they're making relatively inexpensive, not smart bombs, just crude artillery shells faster than all the rest of Europe and the US. And they'll just lob more artillery, more bombs over and destroy anything that you start to rebuild. This cannot stop. This cannot stop until Russia is forced out of Ukraine. And that can only be done by choking the Russian economy really choking it, not with weak sanctions, but with actually destroying and shutting down key parts of the Russian economy. It's a form of hybrid warfare. This is an open war, and to win an open war against an opponent who is economically reliant on certain things such as gas and oil, you shut down their gas and oil. You shut down their ability to export certain things like diamonds. You shut down their ability to make a profit off of their weapons by tarnishing the reputation of said weapons. And then the rest of the world is going to say, well, do we really want any of those Russian, tanks or artillery or anything else? Haven't heard the best of things about them and how they've been performing. Unfortunately, the number of Russian soldiers whose lives are lost or ruined by this war, that doesn't mean anything. It means nothing. Let me repeat that. It means nothing to the Kremlin. Money. That's what matters to the Kremlin. Hit their pockets, hit them hard, and get enough Russian people actually angry that there's no more money trickling down to them, or even less than before. That is how you get the Russians to back the hell off, in addition to defeating them on the battlefield. Two-pronged attack. Anyway. Compared to $2.2 billion on humanitarian aid and $77.1 billion on financial aid. I will say, don't underestimate that $77.1 billion, because Ukraine is a country. It does have an economy, and if it goes completely bankrupt domestically or defaults on its foreign debts and such, then that is going to destabilize things to the point of Ukraine no longer being able to continue this war. So we need more military aid, but the rest of this is important. It is, guys. It is actually keeping Ukraine surviving and existing as a country. Just, I want to remind people of that. And with $60 billion of U.S. military aid to Ukraine stuck in Congress for the foreseeable future, it's not immediately clear who could feasibly plug that funding gap. This is where the core question, can Europe really stand in for the U.S., gets complicated. Some European officials like to frame this as a purely economic question. The World Bank's most recent data puts Russia's GDP at $2.24 trillion compared to the EU's $16.75 trillion. That's all well and good, but how are you using that $16.75 trillion US dollar economy, that GDP, and how is it being allocated respectively to Ukraine's war effort? That's the real question. On paper, this means that Europe can hypothetically outlast Russia if the war becomes one of economic attrition. Excuse me. Or more crudely, yes, Europe does have the money to plug the American gap. The difficulty is in how this works politically. The EU is made up of 27 sovereign states who all have an independent foreign policy. Some are members of NATO, some are not, and are officially neutral. Some are comfortable with buying U.S. weapons and sending them to Ukraine for the specific purpose of killing Russian soldiers, others are not. Some are geographically close to Russia and worry about war spilling over to their borders. Others are protected by miles of land between them and Moscow and have enjoyed decades of good economic relations with Russia. Over the course of the war, European thinking has evolved. Diplomats and officials say that earlier in the conflict, Brussels' role had been understood as providing financial aid for things like keeping basic functions of state running and hosting refugees, while the U.S. would sort the weapons. Yet, I really want to highlight this, guys, because it kind of goes back to what I was saying just a few minutes ago. Brussels, meaning to represent the EU, Europe as a whole, had been understood as providing financial aid for things like keeping basic functions and services and functions of state alive in this crisis, this crunch time during this war, where Ukraine is vulnerable if alone on that front. And also hosting refugees. While the U.S. would sort the weapons. Now, it's all on Europe. So the original unspoken agreement was, hey, we'll help to keep the civilian side of Ukraine operational, and the civilian society, the government's ability to pay their government workers, pay those who have pensions, etc., etc., keep post offices and other places open and functional, while Ukraine is putting what money they do have into their war footing, and the U.S. helps out with sending money and equipment, billions worth for weapons. Well, now all of that is on Europe's shoulder. And that's the really hard part. That's where can that last for 8 months comes into question. It is undeniable that the EU is taking defense more seriously. It recently unveiled a plan to finally build up a European defense industry that could rival that of the US in the future. But even this long-term plan, still a long way from becoming reality, asks uncomfortable questions of member states. Should EU money be spent outside the bloc? Where should factories be built? What kind of relationship should procurement plans have with initiatives NATO already has? That's all for the long term. In the short term, Ukraine needs weapons urgently. CNN reported last week that Russia is producing 3 times more artillery shells than the US and Europe combined for use in Ukraine. An initiative led by the Czech Republic, supported by a further 17 EU member states, has been put together outside of the EU structures to buy ammunition on the international markets that will be sent to Ukraine. The virtue of not being an official EU plan means that they can move much faster and don't have to worry about their fellow member states, chiefly Hungary, which has a closer relationship with Russia than the rest of the EU, vetoing or watering down plans. The Czech initiative has already purchased 300,000 artillery rounds, and it is expected they will arrive in Ukraine in June. The Ukrainians, of course, are delighted at the initiative, but also acknowledge that it won't plug the US-shaped hole. So, yeah, Ukraine will be happy to receive 300,000 shells. Assume they need to actually be delivered on time this time. But yeah, Ukraine will be very happy to receive all that. It's still not enough. For Ukraine to survive and win this war, for Ukraine to have things end favorably on their terms and not just be positioning itself to have this frozen conflict between Ukraine and Russia sit there for another 15, 20 years. Possibly an additional war break out again in the future. A lot more needs to be done. Earlier this month, Ukraine's foreign minister said the Czech initiative is great, but it's far from sufficient. If, besides the Czech initiative, 2 more initiatives are implemented this year, the Russian troops in Ukraine will face more significant problems on the front line. This was seen by some as a reference to the blocked U.S. package. So, can Europe fill the funding void in Ukraine left by Washington, D.C.? The answer is yes, Europe has the means. Whether it has the will is the bigger unknown. And, yeah, I'd say that's pretty accurate. Officials from Eastern European countries stress the importance of convincing their counterparts that Ukrainian security is the same thing as European security. While former Soviet states are often painted as hawks in Western Europe, they make the somewhat reasonable point that if Russia were to invade NATO territory, bombs would most likely fall on them, not in Athens or Rome, for example. Yep. But it would affect all European countries, especially those in NATO. And those countries who share borders with Russia almost universally share the view that the only way to ensure Russia doesn't expand its aggression is by making NATO so strong, an attack would be unthinkable. even to President Vladimir Putin, making this case for dramatic increases in defense spending is hard enough, even while there is a war on European borders. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg welcomed the news last month that 18 of the allies would spend 2% of GDP on defense. It was a dramatic improvement from a decade ago when only 3 NATO countries met the minimum threshold. But it still means that even during a crisis like the one in Ukraine, more than a third are not meeting this target. And, even in a crisis, when it comes to nation states, up to a third makes sense. I mean, unless a literal world war is raging, even with a literal world war raging, I can still see many different nation states pussyfooting around, for lack of a better word. But yeah, we need to get even more people on board, even more nations spending more on their defense in Europe. And they need to actually hold that spending, not just assume that they can stop doing it in, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. The longer the war drags on, the more likely fatigue is to set in. The more pressures on domestic budgets for things like public services and pensions, like I said, the harder it becomes to justify giving another country money to fight a war. Ah, yes. And there's the hard part also. Europe, unlike places like the US, is used to a lot of government spending that benefits its own citizens. More than in certain things, whether it's pensions that actually get paid properly and on time. I'd say public services. There's still, of course, there's significant spending on that in the U.S. as well, but yeah, healthcare is a big one. There is a potential for citizens of Western European countries to become unhappy, or I don't know, kind of like we see with all these farmers and trucker protests. When spending gets shifted in a wartime economy, inevitably you end up with people who are upset, regardless of a war raging, that money isn't being spent on things that would benefit them. Unfortunately, that's just human nature. But bottom line is, this is incredibly important. And continuing to reiterate that point to the citizenry of both the US and Europe and Canada and all other countries who are allies to Ukraine is crucial, everybody. I'm trying not to cough. And that is exactly the point at which European thinking can go one of two ways. Ensure Ukraine defeats Russia for the sake of the wider continent, or ask, what does it have to do with us? Yes, Europe can fill the gap left by the US, and in some respects is trying to do just that. But it all depends on whether Ukraine's biggest allies in Europe can keep winning the argument. All right. So, I definitely agree with the author of this article. And nothing is set in stone, nothing is done and over with yet. But we are at a point now, guys, where it's looking more and more like Ukraine, without more support, is going to survive this war, is going to come out of this war in a strong position to be part of the EU and NATO. But deoccupation of territories held by the enemy, that could end up being something that doesn't happen for a long while if allies don't step up their game. So, go out, vote, defeat Donald Trump, Americans. Don't be complacent. don't think that you've done enough, go out there, get people voting, get people voting specifically against Donald Trump and his party up and down the ballot in the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And come November of 2024, I don't know what'll happen between now and then, but hopefully we will see a major victory for democracy and a major victory for the arsenal of democracy finally being delivered again to allies in Ukraine. Keep up the fight. All right, anyway, let's move on. Let's take a look at some comments right quick. Yeah, I've got some prescription grade cough suppressant that I'm a little more than halfway through. And as soon as I'm done with that, I'm just going to be using a lot of cough drops, and I've got like bottles of honey. I'm probably just going to literally be drinking tea with honey inside of it and straight honey. Just anything that can help to heal and soothe the throat. And if the cough really, really doesn't go away, then I'm going to go back to my doctor and say, look, I know you said it's supposed to be viral, not bacterial in your opinion, but something's going on here, so take a closer look. But yeah, I mean, I feel much healthier, so hopefully it'll clear up soon. Exactly. Dumitru has a good point here. I'm going to pin his message. A frozen conflict. A frozen conflict won't solve a thing. Exactly. If you want a good example of this, everybody, if you want two good examples of this that directly involve Russia in other countries, look at the Nagorno-Karabakh situation between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and really even beyond that, the Zangezura corridor, all of the other territorial disputes that those two countries have. Those have just been frozen conflicts for decades. Nothing was resolved. You know what happened? Geopolitical realities changed. Armenia became more vulnerable, or Azerbaijan became stronger and more assertive, and Russia became less committed to that region. And so now that wasn't resolved. It's just resulting in more war and one side dominating the other. Republic of Georgia, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, occupation by Russian troops. That's basically a frozen conflict. Republic of Georgia, Tbilisi does not recognize either of those so-called breakaway republics as legitimate. They are still recognized as part of Georgia by the Georgian government, but there's nothing they can do about it right now. It's just, yeah, it remains frozen since 2008, that conflict. Russian troops occupying part of the country, and it's just been a waiting game for them. The difference with Ukraine, though, is that if this conflict becomes frozen, it will ramp up again. And Ukraine is in a position where, unlike the other two countries mentioned, it will, whether it does it mostly by itself, whether it does it with a lot of funding and investment from allies in the West and neighbors right there physically next to it in Europe, will be getting its military ramped up, will be having a stronger defense industry to prevent this from happening again. It's an arms race. So, yeah, imagine a frozen war that has an accompanying arms race. That's a frozen conflict. That's not something that anyone wants to see. That isn't. Those are not ingredients for anything good, people. Anyway, yeah, thanks for good comment. I've also heard ISIS-K from Afghanistan, but witnesses at the time said Ingushetians. From the report I heard, they may actually known or just been guessing. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know enough to say what it is about whether them being from Ingushetia is legitimate or not, but I also heard those claims. But I also heard them from Russian sources. So, again, yeah, a lot of this is coming from Russian government and intelligence sources. So I will be much more trusting of news sources from outside of Russia relating to this matter. Okay, let's see here. Checking questions. Oh, got a question from Mr. Squiggle. What type of cable? It was just a USB cable. Like, I've got my my microphone cable. It wasn't even that my microphone wasn't picking up. I could see that my audio was being picked up by the system. I just couldn't hear it. Like, the audio wouldn't transfer in any way whatsoever that I could hear it from my headphones or from my speakers. So it was the output that was the problem. And yeah, I just switched out the USB cable connecting the audio console to the laptop, and boom, that helped fix it. So it was very annoying. Well, and even more annoying is the fact that I don't know why this is just a software issue, but now my Discord doesn't want to work properly with it. So I have to go in and figure out why my Discord's not working with my microphone and headset anymore. But other than that one little bug, everything else is working fine now. I really do love this audio setup. It can sometimes be a little finicky, but there's just so many benefits to having this new equipment that, yeah, I could not go back. It makes your life a lot more convenient having one of these consoles in front of you. All right, from UPU2408. Hi, I read that ISIS-K is responsible for the attack and has connections to Afghanistan, and that the attack would even had a connection to the Russia-Afghan war. Question is, cough. Question, where to find more info on Russia-Afghanistan relations? Oh, man. That's a very big question. That's kind of like asking where can I get more information on India-Pakistan relations, or where can I get, well, maybe no, not to that same extent, but it's like asking where can I get more information on U.S. Afghanistan relations. Honestly, it's or British UK Afghanistan relations. Plenty of information from old textbooks, especially from the time of the Soviet-Afghan War. With regards to more modern sources, I mean, of course, you can always do some reading on the embassy websites for the Embassy of Afghanistan to Russia, the Embassy of Russia to Afghanistan. assuming they still have one open because Taliban. But of course, with Russia being a terrorist state now, well, always has been, but really showing that more so than usual these days. They've opened their uh, diplomatic channels with Afghanistan, with the Taliban specifically, a bit more. Um, there used to be a good book actually on this topic, and it was in English. Let me see if I can find it. That I haven't read the whole thing, but I read a portion of it, and I was pretty impressed by what I had read. One sec. No. I'll be sitting here all day if I try to remember exactly what title it was that I saw a couple years ago on this topic. Um, I guess what I will say though, maybe a good place to start. I never recommend people to go to Wikipedia, mostly because there can be so much misinformation on Wikipedia. Um, it's not bad for getting a quick, like really quick, informal glean on a topic, but you have to double check all of your sources, and it's just very easy to um, become complacent and not do so, and just kind of, oh, I read this somewhere and it seems like it's accurate, but then you realize it's Wikipedia, and you're like, oh, well, then it's like a 50-50 toss up whether or not it's true. Um, so I would suggest read up on the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan on maybe Encyclopedia Britannica. They've got a pretty good article on the topic. I'll put that into the chat. And beyond that, yeah, I would say, if you want to know more about really any of Russia's relationships with Islamic nations, nations that have had governments that have Sharia or uh, Islamic influence on their actual laws of governance, like Afghanistan obviously has, of course. Take a look at the history of the Chechen Wars and Soviet Soviet conflict with regional activists and uh, religious institutions in Ingushetia, Dagestan, and Chechnya. So I'll put this article in the chat for you. Excuse me. And there was a follow-up question from the same, also from UPU 2408. Hi, Sekai. How can we help your channel to grow? Would it be possible to send super chats, for example? Thank you for the stream and everything you do for Ukraine. Thank you very much. Oh, this cough. Even my voice is cracking a little bit because of it. I hate it. Thank you for a really good question. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, the channel is slowly growing. We're going to get to 1,000 subscribers, I'm sure, before too long. And that's just how it is a lot of the time with channels, especially for more niche topics, such as, I mean, this channel is, of course, dedicated to opposing tyrants and tyranny all around the world, but the biggest focus, the primary focus, is the war in Ukraine and stopping Vladimir Putin's genocide against the Ukrainian people. Although we also cover other things like the situation with Taiwan or situations happening in other parts of the world. I might even cover the war in Myanmar a little bit. It's very hard to cover Myanmar because, first of all, it's been going on for so long. It really has been going on longer than the most recent outbreak of fighting. It's been a low-grade civil war for decades. That one's just a little hard to cover because you don't have easier delineation between good versus bad. With Ukraine, of course, there are shades of gray, just like any, the war between Ukraine and Russia. There are shades of gray, just like with anything else in life. But it is generally, it is pretty cut and dry. Ukraine is in the right. Russia is in the wrong. Ukraine equal good guys. Russia equal bad guys. In the case of Myanmar, for example, though, there's just so many factions and ethnically based armies and warlords and such that even when the military junta dictatorship falls there, I expect there to be more fighting and chaos and jockeying for power in a vacuum. So it's hard to say which tyrant to oppose because it's hard to even identify who's really the, quote, good guy. Anyway, off topic. Would it be possible to send super chats, for example? Thank you for the stream and everything you do for Ukraine. Thank you for being here and caring about Ukraine. With regards to helping the channel grow, just being here, engaging, sharing, liking, encouraging other people to subscribe. These are all ways that can help. I am thinking that I'll be starting an Instagram pretty soon to accompany the YouTube channel and Discord. I've just been busy with, I've just been busy. But that's probably the next step for social media. Mostly because I feel like it's a better use of time than setting up Facebook and Threads right now, or Twitter. I really don't want to do Twitter, guys. I really don't. I might consider it. I know there's a lot of people who use Twitter. If you use Twitter, I am not knocking you. I'm not. It's a useful tool, but I just personally don't like Twitter. So I'll probably start with Threads, but I may consider expanding into Twitter in the future because you can't just avoid unpleasant things, like all of the toxicity and flaming on Twitter. Just because it's annoying doesn't mean that you can avoid it. In any case, yeah. So tune into my channel, share these videos. Engage in our chat, in our Discord. Join our Discord if you haven't already. There's a link. There should be a link that gets posted occasionally by Nightbot that lets you join. And yeah, another thing is tune into Rick the Ukrainian and the Shills. Both of those channels, I very often, I work with Rick. He and I have known each other for a while now. He's an awesome guy. He and I talk a lot. So, you support his channel. You'll find a lot of Tridents among the rollers over there. You support the Shills. As Dick says, the fellow babies. We got a lot of Tridents among everyone over there. So, yeah, show support to this channel. Show support to friends of the channel, other channels that I work with, and yeah, we're just gonna keep doing what we're doing. I try to avoid drama is the big thing, and
Yeah, I've never really had any problem with that sort of thing ever when I've, you know, hung with Rick's community and the Shills community. Both are pretty fantastic. All right, now then, next question, and then we're gonna go ahead and move on to uh, where we're gonna go to next. Then we'll go ahead and do a video update with Juzzy about the situation at the front lines. From Steve Walsh. Stephen Walsh. What would be the top 3 things, maybe top 10, to discuss a MAGA type stranger you meet on the street to help them get over their fever? You mean just in general to realize that they're in a cult? Uh, oh man. 10 things off the top of my head. That's a little difficult. There's a lot of stuff that could be brought up, but I'm trying to think of things that wouldn't just go in one ear and out the other. There absolutely is a way, and people, you have to be aware of that. And it's important to realize that finding ways to deprogram people, because I do legitimately think of it as a political cult. And anyone who's ever dealt with cults will know that there are ways to combat the mental processes that ensnare people and keep them held in a cult, whether it's a religious cult or a political cult or some, I don't know, some really random thing like aggressive Zumba or some MLM marketing scheme that's got a weird cult like component to it. Uh, the Zumba thing was kind of a joke, but not the MLM thing. Like that's a good example of something that's supposed to be quote a business, but some of them are really just like people get really into the model and think that they're making money, even though maybe they aren't making that much money at all. Just making money for other people who are above them on the chain of command. Um, Bottom line is, it's a political cult. And to deprogram someone, it requires understanding the psychology of cults. It requires understanding the psychology behind uh, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Uh, Power dynamics, or rather, specifically power dynamics between someone in a position of authority and those who are looking for leadership of some sort. Uh, it really does. It requires learning a bit about both psychology and sociology. And even then, once you know a bit about how it's possible to kind of talk sense into people and to deprogram them, um, it can take years. I mean, when it is easier to trick someone than to convince someone that they have been tricked. There are still people to this day who believe that. Okay, guys, let me put it like this, and I know this. I've talked to these people. There are still some people who believe that Donald Trump won in 2016, or I'm sorry, in 2020, uh, and that in 2020, uh, there was some secret conspiracy that overthrew him, and he's like the, chosen one or whatever, and he's still the legitimate president of the United States. And the only thing they have to really listen to is whatever he puts out on Twitter. There are still people who actually think of his words on Twitter as presidential decrees, and they don't have to listen to other laws as long as Donald Trump says that it's okay to do something, which is pretty scary. There are also some people who literally think that Donald Trump is a religious messiah of some sort, and they have made their own low budget movies on that topic. So anyway, I'm kind of just veering off topic, but three things to talk a MAGA person out of their fever. Okay, I would say It's so hard because there's a couple of different approaches you could take. I would say you could either go the truly rational and logical, cold hard facts, less emotion, why it is objectively um, absurd to believe that Donald Trump is still president or that he and his movement are good for America. But a lot of that is going to fall on deaf ears because you got to remember that there is an emotional component always for people who are looking at this. That component is a huge part of why they're willing to listen in the first place. So I would say first, arguments that counter the cult like mindset with something else that's equally emotionally resonant, such as Trump is not a good Christian. Here are examples of why. Here are quotes from the Bible and reasons why. If the person you're talking to is more religious, use religion as a way to help deprogram them away from the bile that Donald Trump spits. If you yourself are not that religious, then yeah, that can be a little difficult. But I mean, anyone can do that. Honestly, whether you're a religious person or not religious person, you can still point out facts from religious sources that point out inconsistencies. So there's one. Two, I would say, point out to them that there are pretty good metrics in the current economy, and that under the Biden administration, there have been certain metrics of economic valuation that are more beneficial to people than during the time of Trump's presidency. Third, I would say honestly, the third one would probably just be a compilation of some of the most heinous things he said. Like I could shoot someone in the middle of the street and not lose votes, or, you know, the whole secret recording of what he said about women, I think in that tour van a couple years ago, which would usually be the death of any other politician's career, but not his, because double standards. Yeah, there's so much that already exists as far as recordings of the man, video recordings and audio, saying horrible, heinous things. You put together a compilation and show that to people and really press them on the topic. Those are the three things I can think of. But even then, it's difficult. Thanks for a great question. Oh, and here's a follow-up question. One more from Manu. Oh, and I guess this is related to what I was saying before about some people literally thinking that Donald Trump is a divine messiah, which is kind of scary. Does Trump believe that he is the chosen one? I think it depends on how one interprets this question. I do think he is narcissistic and possibly a little megalomaniacal, a bit of a megalomaniac. Definitely a narcissist. Now, do I think that Donald Trump actually thinks he's like the second coming of Jesus Christ or something like that? No, I don't think he actually believes that. To be honest, I don't even really think the man is religious in the first place. I don't really know, but it doesn't really matter all that much. But as far as, quote, the chosen one, just a general idea of being the only one who can accomplish something, or being like the protagonist of a story and everything centers around him and everything he does is incredibly important. Yeah, he thinks of himself as the, quote, chosen one in that sense. And if people want to put a religious spin on that, or say that he's, like, quote, saving America or whatever, even though it's the exact opposite, I don't think he really cares. All he cares about is that people pay attention to him and give him stuff, give him money, give him business opportunities, give him power, give him attention. That's the only thing that Donald Trump really cares for. Thank you for a good question. All right, and with that, we're going to move over to check out Juzzy's update about stuff from the front lines. One sec, everybody. Hold on, I had the wrong source. Let me get this fixed.
Jorge has always put the ones he loves first. But when it comes to caring for his teeth, he's let his own...
Day 757 of the Ukrainian war map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 434,000 military personnel losses, which represents an additional 870 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, so 8 tanks, 37 APVs and 35 artillery. Then as for a 2.0 version of my own makeshift list in the wake of the recent devastation to Russian oil refineries, because more specifically, there are now 14 oil refineries hit by Ukrainian drones and 5 oil depots, and that's specifically referring to infrastructure inside of Russia, which is problematic for these complex and very stationary production facilities. This is still a work in progress of mine, but it's nice to get an idea of where things are at, roughly speaking. Then we'll start out in the Russian map today in the Baltic Sea, as a Russian fishing trawler named Captain Lobanov met a tragic fate during a military exercise not too far from St. Petersburg. So during the exercise, a missile fired by the Russian Navy struck the vessel, causing it to sink, followed by an embarrassing cover-up that lasted 3 days. As this event actually occurred on the 19th of March, but the details were finally released just today, which is a relatively standard approach by the Russian military these days, with delayed disclosures of problematic events like these. And so I'd specifically ask how this happened, but I'm sure the answer lies somewhere between intoxication and incompetence. Then we move to Russia's Belgorod region, where things are heating up, and I mean that in a literal and multifaceted way. Because starting off, according to Russian media, an Mi-8 helicopter made a hard landing yesterday near the village of Rovenki, which is far away from any anti-Kremlin militia activity. And as these things go, Russian state media published that the helicopter itself suffered just some mechanical damage, with 1 out of the 4 crew members on board wounded. So far, there's no reason stated for the cause of this event, but to be honest, this line of wording sounds a lot like all of the other Russian statements, as they seek to downplay damaging events, only to have their lies exposed later. Plus, for instance, we've seen what wording like only slightly damaged has meant before, because more often than not, it converts to permanently decommissioned. Then, still in Belgorod, more explosions in the morning at an unspecified location, likely near the border, where the anti-Kremlin forces and Putin's soldiers continue to engage one another. And on the topic of the anti-Kremlin soldiers from the region, just yesterday they held a press conference in Kyiv to discuss their recent cross-border raids into Russian territory. The goal of these incursions, according to the fighters, was to open a second front and to alleviate pressure on the Ukrainian troops in the Kupiansk area. So the commander of the Russian Volunteer Corps, alongside Alexei Baranovsky from the Freedom of Russia Legion and a masked soldier from the Siberian Battalion, claimed that their operations had stabilized the front and disrupted Russia's alleged plans to advance further into the Kharkiv Oblast. So these militias also reportedly receive logistical support, intelligence, and medical evacuation assistance from Ukraine. However, they strongly maintain that they are Russian citizens who have taken up arms in Russian territory only. And to contrast their insurgencies in relation to last year, the scale of the recent raids is said to be larger than previous attacks in 2023, with the anti-Kremlin forces claiming to have inflicted significant losses on Russian troops and equipment. And they even have a tally of their own Russian losses from Putin's army as well. So I might start flicking up those stats every once in a while on the screen as well. And on this topic for the region as well, it's been reported that the Russian Ministry of Defense has been compelled to divert troops from the front lines of Ukraine to safeguard the border regions of Belgorod and Kursk following this series of operations conducted by these anti-Kremlin volunteer groups. Now, interestingly, prior to these attacks, the anti-Kremlin volunteer forces announced their plans to intensify attacks and thus called on Belgorod Governor Gladkov to initiate a full evacuation of civilians in the region, but intercepted phone conversations suggest that the Russian army is not much in the way of concerned about waiting for evacuations and instead just proceeding to pummel into local villages with guided aerial munitions, causing a lot of indiscriminate destruction, even in their own country. So it's just more of that Russian military playbook I've been talking about. Absolute savages. Then we'll head across to the Ukrainian map today as in a massive early morning attack, Russia launched a barrage of missiles and drones targeting various parts of Ukraine. The assault included ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles, cruise missiles, and the Kh-22 ASMs. And ASMs as in anti-ship missiles, which are simply not well enough optimized for land targets. And as a result of these events, reports indicate that the Dnipro hydroelectric power plant dam in the Zaporizhia region was hit by Russian missiles, causing extensive damage.
I just want to stop there for a sec and again point out what has been said many times, and what is something that will always be the primary focus here on this channel: Russian acts of terror against Ukraine and other neighbors. Of course, right now during the war, specifically and especially against Ukrainians. So, yeah, it's horrible anytime any unarmed civilians are harmed anywhere in the world. But when this just keeps happening again and again and again, come on, look at this. You know, especially since Ukraine, I'm sure, had nothing to do with this attack on a music hall. You're going to target a bunch of innocent people in Ukraine and really amp up your missile strikes because either you did a false flag or ISIS came after you and you were caught with your pants down in your own country. Yeah, it's bloody ridiculous. It is really bullshit, everybody.
Though the dam reportedly withstood serious structural harm. But the eastern powerhouse of the dam suffered a hit, and at least one civilian bus was destroyed in the attack. Also, explosions were reported in multiple cities, including Kharkiv, which was attacked by multiple ballistic missiles. But also there was other cases for Zaporizhia, Dnipro, and Vinnytsia, where critical infrastructure was targeted. And while the attack failed to knock out Ukraine's power grid, the UK Defense Ministry suggests that Russia's strategy may have shifted to targeting Ukraine's military industrial capacity. And why is this happening now? 2 large salvos, 2 days in a row? Well, firstly note, Russia has launched relatively few missile strikes over the past month, and it was likely a stockpiling of newly produced and existing missiles designed to be a military response to Ukraine firing drones into Russia recently. Therefore, it would actually appear that Russia is, at least in part, stockpiling their missiles, their munitions, to use at a later stage as a form of retaliation. Which, if true, is a mind-blowing concept, suggesting that Russia needs to hold off on firing missile salvos into Ukraine because they may just need them as a later retaliatory show of force. Then we move further into, well, the east of Ukraine now, as Russian units have now taken control over most parts of western Tonenka, which is about 8 kilometers or 5 miles west of Avdiivka. It's been a grey zone for a while, but is now largely considered all but occupied. But as for updates on the larger front, Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Syrsky has just announced that Ukrainian forces have successfully stabilized the situation in this eastern part of the country. And from what we can see on the map, that's pretty much more or less fairly accurate. Oh, but on that note, Russian forces are still vying for full control over Orlivka and Berdichi, so we'll zoom back into that one there. Now, Syrsky previously reported that Ukraine was facing an ongoing ammunition shortage, which likely contributed to the fall of Avdiivka, and so the stabilization of the Eastern Front is a significant development for Ukrainian forces who have been battling it out against Russian advances in the region for months.
That's an understatement, guys. Stabilizing the situation is paramount because the ammunition shortage is still very real. It is still going on. And while the artillery shells being delivered by the Czech Republic are very appreciated and needed, we need to at least double, probably triple that amount in order to help keep things stabilized for a while and see Ukraine through until Biden wins the election. This is a big thing. We need to get allies on board to keep Ukraine stable through until the wintertime, which is horrible. I hate that politics are in the way of everything. I hate that it gives Russia that much time to plan and attempt to create countermeasures. But it's where we're at.
Then, somewhere in the east, we saw cluster munitions by the AFU landing on Russian positions in Klishchivka, which is just south of Bakhmut. Then we also saw an American M67 grenade dropped from a quadcopter, destroying a Russian tank. Then, in a somber or lonely feeling moment, a sad Russian soldier sits on the bank of a reservoir near Avdiivka and watches his sunken BTR-82, an armored personnel carrier. Then we head to the Black Sea, as in response to successful Ukrainian strikes on Russian naval ships in recent times, Russia is continuing to redeploy its Black Sea fleet from occupied Crimea but to the expected safer regions or location of Novorossiysk, according to Ukraine's military intelligence, where spokesperson Andriy Yusov stated that the relocation of the Black Sea Fleet headquarters infrastructure and warships is actively underway, although also specifying that Russia cannot completely abandon Crimea of its naval forces. But even with Russia losing 33% of its Black Sea fleet, the supposed safer waters of Novorossiysk are by no means a guaranteed safety measure. As it was just last year, in August of 2023, when Ukraine sent a number of small naval drones and aerial drones this way, hitting the Olenigorsky Gonyak landing ship that was later seen listing back to port. In other words, Ukraine had this naval and aerial range capacity back about 8 months ago, and we're all quite sure it has it even more now. Then headed across to some news for the day. So in a recent revelation, Ukraine's Minister of Strategic Industries disclosed that the country has successfully deployed a domestically produced missile capable of striking targets at over 640 kilometers away, or about 400 miles.
That's pretty impressive. And the fact that it's domestically produced, that makes me pretty happy to hear.
While specific details were not provided, this development marks a pretty significant milestone in Ukraine's defensive capabilities. Furthermore, officials reported that air defense systems and high-precision missiles akin to the US-made HIMARS are currently under development, and I would certainly venture a guess here to say that we might be looking at some sort of homegrown ATACMS and GIMLARS rockets that could be fired directly from the HIMARS platforms. Then, moving to some other news, in Krasnodar Krai of Russia, 2 prison colonies are set to close due to a lack of inmates, as many have joined the Russian army to fight in Ukraine. Although the regional commissioner for human rights described this as an alarming trend, with the drop in prisoner numbers prompting authorities to optimize and save money by shutting down the institutions. The Kremlin has been recruiting convicts for its war efforts since the summer of 2022, initially through the Wagner mercenary group and later directly under the Russian MOD. However, many of these convicted recruits were assigned to Storm Z assault units, often used as cannon fodder, and suffered heavy casualties, somewhere in the rate of up to 80 to 90%. So to put things in perspective, before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia's prison population was about 450,000. Now they have about 200,000 less than that figure due to those cannon fodder tactics. But word is, Russia has since completely exhausted its supply of willing prisoner participants for the Russian special military operation, with the remaining cohort, if forcibly drafted into the Ukraine war, we'll then see some of the most undertrained, or indeed certainly untrained, and lowest morale fighters on the battlefield. Not exactly a trustworthy bunch of fighters. I just wonder how many will either A, desert, or B, shoot their commanders, or at least attempt to. But if Russia manages to somehow pull that off with the deployment of the remaining able-bodied inmate population, they would still need another 200,000 or so from the general Russian population to get those 14 new brigades and 16 new divisions, 2 new armies that the Russian defense minister stated the creation of soon. But nothing happens in isolation, because even if Russia manages to pull, say, 100,000 prisoners, which are of the lowest quality and most ineffective of their army, into Ukraine, Russia then loses an extremely low-cost labor force of inmates, for which Russian society already has a blue-collar labor workforce shortage of about 500,000 workers. In other words, it just adds one more notch on the belt of the ever-growing demographic collapse that is currently in the making for Russia, happening in real time due to Russia's botched invasion of Ukraine. Then,
Yeah, that is a major issue really for Russia. Again, they may not care too much about their own people's lives, but they do care about the money that those lives can generate in the economy. And so we are going to see some major pain for the Russian economy in the future, everybody. Pretty much the only thing they're going to have after all this is done. Think of, well, I guess they'll start rebuilding for gas and oil but a lot of their facilities are being targeted. So until they could actually get all of that up and functional again, I mean, just think about it. It'll just be like the 90s after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Just cheap Russian weapons from all of this wartime production in their economy being sold to whoever wants guns anywhere in the world. That's what Russia is banking on. More warlord economics. So, yeah. Gotta beat them back. Gotta squeeze that economy every way possible.
Headed across to a quick funny to round it all off for today, guys. So this is some satellite imagery from a few weeks ago, but only released much more recently, showing a silhouette of a Russian Kilo-class submarine drawn in the port of Novorossiysk, which, by the way, is the exact same port I mentioned earlier that has no guarantees of safety with its naval forces. Ah, Russian ingenuity at its finest. You see, in the modern age, surveillance and reconnaissance technologies and weapons platforms use various spectrums like radar, infrared, and synthetic aperture radar that can easily differentiate between a real object and a painted decoy. But either way, Russia will stop at nothing to pull some deception methodology right out of a World War II playbook. So what do you do when you've stretched your military budget razor thin and already had a massive drawdown on your own national sovereign wealth fund, which would otherwise be useful to purchase and build effective and multimodal defense installations? Well, of course, you pull out a couple of cans of black paint instead. Genius. That's our Russia. So thanks for watching today, guys. Hope you've enjoyed. Thanks for all of the likes, the shares, and the comments as we continue to spread these messages. And yeah, I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.
All right. So that was our update on the front lines from Juzzy. Oh. And as per usual, forgot to do this a second ago. Let me go ahead and put the link to the video in the chat. All right. And so we're a little more than an hour and a half in. So I think I'm going to go ahead and, let's see, put these on, bring this down. All right. All right, I'm going to make a quick donation. Actually, let's see. Have we had any donations come through yet? We have not had any donations yet on stream, everybody. So we're going to get ready to close up the stream, but first, I'm going to make a donation right quick. Anyone who would like to join me, please feel free to do so over PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, or Monobank directly if Monobank works for you in your country. Again, it's TonyTkachenko27@gmail.com is the email to search for on PayPal for donations. I'm going to make a donation right quick. I'll be right back. While I'm doing so, feel free to chat, ask questions, all of that. Okay, I sent $50 over PayPal. And I think Anton is awake right now. If he is, if you're with us, I hope you got the money real fast. Anton. And yeah, we're going to keep pushing forward. Just so you guys know, as a frame of reference, each drone is of these Ukrainian-made FPV drones that we're fundraising for. It's about $500 to $600 per drone. We've done 16 of them so far. We're still kind of waiting until we've got, I don't know, probably at least 100,000 or so hryvnia. Be able to get at least a couple of them put together like a batch before we send more, so it's not just one at a time piecemeal. And we're currently at 47,500 hryvnia. And now that I think about it, yeah, it's been a second since we sent another batch, so I don't have any immediate like new photos or videos, but I should have some older ones I can show you guys real fast. One sec. And yeah, if the bar doesn't update, if Anton's not awake right now to transfer the money, then I'll post the update on the community tab like I usually do. Here we go. Here's a good picture. Probably be easiest to open it in the browser. Hold on. Gotta
adjust this. Here's a picture of Rick from channel Rick the Ukrainian. He assisted us immensely, he and the rest of the rollers, with getting our first large batch of 15 drones sent out. And yeah, here he is with his Putin Huilo hat, which I really love that hat. It's awesome. And there's Berry Monkey along with the last couple of drones we sent before. So, well, yeah. yeah. I think there's a couple that are either in boxes, some of those boxes, or in the front seat, but there's a majority of the drones right there. And yeah, so this is what we are still continuing to fundraise for, guys. These go to the soldiers of the 110th Mechanized Brigade. They fought in Avdiivka. We were doing heavy fundraising while they were still in the city. And we are continuing to fundraise now as they continue to fight and serve near the city and push back against the invaders. All your support is appreciated. And thank you very much for standing with Ukraine. All right. With that, we're at 1 hour, 46 minutes. We're going to go ahead and close the stream for right now. Call it this good. Thank you for coming, everybody. Please be sure to go check out Why Ukraine, The Last Alliance. He's going live. And at, let's see, I think, yeah, at, let me see when exactly, at what time the shills are going to be up. I will not be on the shills today because I have another prior appointment that I have to make. But I'll be back on the shills again, normal, as usual, next week. Let me check this real fast. Oh, and let me also check if I have any more questions. Okay, yeah, so it'll be in about 2.5 hours that the shills are on. Yeah, but I will not be on the shills this week. But don't worry, still go check it out. It'll be a great update. Starsky, Greg, Yana, Professor Gertis, and Rick hopefully should all be able to make it. So it'll be a good show. And here is Why Ukraine, The Last Alliance, his stream. I've put that in chat. Please be sure to go check it out. And yeah, thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks for joining. And I hope you all have a great day. Stand with Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.